Headline: 95% of all presentations stink or suck. That includes lectures. I'll explain why I have this at the beginning of this lecture in a second, or in a little bit. So our presentation is about improving lectures and class participation. So our question is, how can we design lectures to foster student participation, engagement, and learning? What most professors like myself would rather not like to know. I think this is pretty accurate. That means that students are not paying attention to what is being said 40% of the time. I think it's probably even higher than that, based on some of the looks that I got when I was teaching face-to-face. In the first 10 minutes of lecture, students are paying attention about 70% of the time. They retain about 70% of the information, Then in the last 10 minutes, they only retain about 20%. Some other things that we know from research: 4 months after taking an introductory psychology course, students knew only 8% more than a control group who had never taken the course. That is a sad number. Only 8% more. So they didn't know much more, in other words. Why is this? As we know, you've been listening to me lecture more than I really like to lecture in the classes in the grad program, because they really sustain attention. Students just don't pay attention. Typically, lectures are focused on surface learning, or in our classes, surface learning is the norm. We study, take a test, make the grade, forget about it. And remember, that's not what we want. We want the deep learning. Excuse me. Tag said in 2004, there is a intimate relationship between motivation and meaning. For students to integrate new knowledge and make meaning, they have to see its personal significance for them. And we've been talking about that this whole class. We have to make the material significant to the student and their interest. And I think in our athletic training classes, both in the lab, the actual face-to-face class setting, and in the clinical setting, the personal significance hopefully is already there. But still, students don't like to listen to lectures. So, what should our emphasis? Our emphasis should be on learning. Learning as dialogue and communication. It means we're interacting between one another, between the teacher and the student. That's interactive, that's cooperative, and relational, versus what that picture shows there is it's a transmission. I'm telling you the information. That's a pipe flow. Turn on the water hose and flow the water down into your mouth, and supposedly you're supposed to learn that way. That's just not what happens. It's not best for learning. The dialogue between the students and the teacher is a better method for us to do, and this can be done in lecturing. So the question is, can lecture be even active? Can we take that active approach of a class as a lecture? And the answer is yes. So I've provided a couple handouts from Silberman in our class. And I could go over all this stuff word for word, just so you know. First thing we want to do is we want to build interest. There's a couple different ways that we can build interest. We lead off with a story or interesting visual. We can have an initial case problem. So in these two, we can talk about an injury that happened, especially if you have a story from your history on the clinical side that brings some personal connection to it. If you're working with students and an injury happened just recently, this would be a good time to bring in that interesting story. If you have visual, with YouTube nowadays, we can get injuries, great stuff there. And then we can do the case problem. We can ask a test question. That doesn't mean that we ask them an exam question, but just test their knowledge, test their information. Next thing we can do is maximize that understanding and retention. And one way is doing this is through the headlines, and that's why I did the headline at the beginning of the class, just to get some attention. We can use a headline to bring things back to what we were lecturing about previously, to remind the students of what we were talking about in the past. Remember, we want to make the connection from new to old, old to new. We can provide examples and analogies. And with our examples and our analogies, as Bain says in his textbook, we do want to use concrete examples, not so abstract that we have a hard time understanding them. One of the reasons why Jesus is such a great teacher is because the way he taught, he used parables. And the parables that he used real life stories. And most of his people who were listening to him at the time of the first century were farmers. And so he used a lot of stories and parables about farmers and crops and all this type of stuff, because that's what the people at that time would understand, because he was the best teacher ever. Help us to understand what he wants us to know about him. We could always do visuals. That is always good, to provide a visual example of what we mean and what we want our students to know. Other critical things involve students. We can do spot challenges. This is assuming that you have told the students that they're supposed to come and be prepared. So you're not just lecturing at them. We're having a dialogue. So, hey, Johnny, what about blah, 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 whatever that may be. We're going to do some exercises in there to get the point across. So we're not just doing lectures at all times, but we can do exercises in the middle of our class or our lecture. We want to reinforce the lecture by having an application problem. And the good thing about our athletic training and education is most of our material is so applicable. It makes it really easy to have real life, everyday problems that students will come across during their time as a student, and eventually, as most of us know, as we've been working as certified athletic trainers, the things that we learned back as a student and our faculty were really stressing to us, now we understand why. Other thing we can ask students is to review the material. That was just lecture. That can be done. Some tools with this, the 1 minute reflection paper. What's the big takeaway that you have for today? What's the main points? Those type of things, without looking at the PowerPoint slides and those type of things. Kind of a tangent. I remember when I was a student, it was before computers and all that stuff were ready, available. We didn't have PowerPoint or anything like that. I mean, we had the old overhead projector type things, and we had to take physical handwritten notes for everything that professors put up or on a whiteboard. And one of the things in my very first sports medicine class, my professor had us do is rewrite our notes. We had to actually turn in our notes in every test. Again, this is pre-computers, so we had to physically rewrite them. My grades and my retention of the material went up significantly by rewriting all my notes, and I started doing that, and I was a sophomore at that time. And so I physically rewrote all my notes for all my core classes, all my athletic training classes, anatomy, physiology, and that helped me retain the information by doing that. The other thing is being an active reader, reading the material before the lecture or before class, going to class, going back and reviewing the information to see why or see what I didn't understand so I can ask the question of the faculty member, because I was a student that wanted to learn. I was motivated. I was internally motivated to learn. Okay, what do we do about students who don't participate in class? This is a huge issue. How can we draw them into a discussion? Again, back to Silberman. And there's quite a few different ways. The way that we structure our classroom is pretty critical. I may have talked about this before, but I can't remember if I have or haven't. If you have your class set up, in just rows, you're up front and lecturing, you already put a barrier. It would be better to have the structure of the class circle or square, small groups, and so we're already starting participation right off the front, right at the beginning there. There's some of these ideals, maybe some of the teaching methods for our choice assignment, so I may not go in too much detail. So anonymous card, and then again I have a document for this too. So you're going to pass out index cards and get anonymous answers to your question. Have the completed cards passed around the group or otherwise distributed. Use this to save time. So you would ask students to complete this, pass them around, and then you ask somebody to answer that question. Just get people to talk about the stuff that you want to cover. Polling, there's a website called Polling Anywhere where you can have students text in. You can put up on the screen multiple choice type question, and they can text in, and it's automatic. They can see their score. There's all the clickers that you can do the same kind of thing. And so you can test knowledge right in the middle of your lecture. So if people aren't getting it, you can go back and cover things. The jigsaw puzzle, this one's kind of an interesting one, is where you have each student and a group of students are experts for various areas. And then you have a bunch of tables set up or groups set up, and you have to put the jigsaw together for the material. So each student has to become an expert on different things and help each other learn put the picture together or whatever you're trying to teach them. What's the main point? So you're not doing all lecture or having the students go out and learn about the material, come to class, and be responsible for certain parts of the material to teach them. And so then students will go around the different circles to get students to try to figure out what the point of the lesson is. A lot of good information online about jigsaw learning and all these other ones too. The old Jeopardy, Family Feud, and other games. I know we've done the Jeopardy type thing quite a bit in some of my classes in the past. It's a good thing to get the students involved, have them write the questions, write the answers. You can actually do the clicker type thing with this, so a lot of fun stuff. You can also do student bingo, where they can do for each letter, you can ask a question. Whips, this one you go around the group and obtain short responses to key questions. Use this when you want to obtain something quickly from each participant. Sentence stems are useful in conducting whips. Invite participants to pass if they wish. Avoid repetition by asking each participant to make new contributions to the process. Call in next speaker. So obviously you're going to ask students to raise their hand when they want to share their views and request that the present speaker call in the next person. It puts a lot of pressure on each student to who they're going to call on next. But again, we want to foster this interaction in classes. We have to do this. We have to teach students how to do this, teach them how to be good students. That goes back to the self-determination theory. We have to teach them to be competent in their abilities. Subgroup discussion is pretty similar. It's a small group discussion where you have each group working on different assignments or different things. Then they'll come back and share the information with the rest of the class. Panels, same kind of thing. We can have each panel doing different things. We can use those big giant sticky notes and then share their views on different things. It's very similar to subgroup discussions. And our last one's the fishbowl. And then what we do here is we ask a portion of the group to form discussion circle and have the remaining participants form a listening circle around them. Bring new groups into the inner circle to continue the discussion. Use this to help bring focus to large group discussions. This is time consuming, but it's a good method for combining virtues of small and large group discussion. These are all good ways, again, of obtaining participation mixed in with lecture. You can lecture for a little bit, then break up into do some of these type of things, so you're not just constantly lecturing. So the most effective teachers combine intellectual excitement with interpersonal rapport. That means we're having a dialogue between student and faculty, or student and teacher. They know that learning begins with students bring to the classroom what's already inside them. So you want to draw out the information that the students already know. One of the disadvantages of this particular class that you're in and I'm in is that it's online. If this class was, face to face, I would be modeling a lot of the different teaching methods / behaviors, and so you can see how that would work. Kind of hard to do that in an online environment. All I can do is kind of give you the theory and give you the particular assignments for you to learn about different areas or different teaching methods. So that's just one of the limitations of this particular course. We got to do what we can do. In our summary, because we always want to have an introduction, the body, and a summary, we can use lectures, but we shouldn't lecture for 15 minutes straight without any kind of interaction between the teacher and the student. We can be very creative. And there's some other teaching methods that we can use to augment our lectures, and just keep that in mind, as if you end up being called to be a teacher. It could be who knows what God has for you down the road. Just be creative with your classes, and don't be afraid to try new things.